Hi there, everybody. Welcome to our first webinar. Please do bear with us in case we have any technical issues, as it is our first, but I'm sure it'll be absolutely fine. What we've done is we've muted all the microphones, and that's just to kind of make it a little bit easier on Michael. We all know what it's like when we're on a conference call and everybody tries to talk at the same time. There is a facility to ask questions, so at the bottom right-hand side of your screen there should be a text box there. Feel free to type those in as we go through the presentation, and what I'll do is I'll collate all those questions, and then when we get the questions section at the end, I'll ask them on your behalf to Michael, and he will give us the complete answer, hopefully, but if not, you can always contact us afterwards. The other thing is as well, we will have a survey that pops up at the end of this, and would really appreciate it if you could fill that out for us. That will help us guide where we go with webinars in the future, which we plan to do, hopefully many. And also what we're doing is this is being recorded as we do it live, and this will be updated to our website, so you can go back and review at a later date should you wish. And now what I will do is I will pass you back over to Michael, who you can obviously see on the screen as well. Michael's our water systems manager who looks after our Legionella team, and Michael's going to give you a talk through on water systems. Okie doke. Thanks.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our first webinar. I'm Michael Dean. So we're going to talk about storage systems. So we titled it Spring into Action Annual Storage Inspection. So basically we're using our expertise to help your company with your water hygiene requirements. So what we're going to talk about this morning. So we're going to start off with the heavy stuff, the legislative requirements. We're going to talk about how you comply with HSG 274 Part 2. We're going to have a little bit of a conversation about sampling or not to sample. Next steps, a case example, and we're going to look at some photographs later on of some of the nasties that we see along our working day. Okay, and as Andrew said, we're going to have a question session, so if you think of any questions, feel free to field them. So we're going to start in the heavy stuff, the legislative requirements. Title it L8, ACOP and all that, because there's quite a bit of guidelines and regulations which we just discussed at kind of a high level this morning. So the background legislation is the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. So under the Health and Safety at Work Act, every employer is under a duty to ensure, so far as reasonably practical, the health, safety and welfare of all employees. That's section 2. So duties under this act extend to risks from Legionella bacteria, which may arise from work activities. So as an employer or a person in control of the premises, you are responsible for health and safety and need to take the right precautions to reduce the risk of exposure to Legionella. Okay, so that's the background. So that's the high level legislation. So underpinned by that legislation is the COSH, and you've got management of health and safety at work regulations, and other legislation which is particularly relevant to this is the water supply water fittings, 1999. That's an act of parliament. So that's the legal status. Remember that the rest of it is now guidance, so it's advice only. So we go to the approved code of practice, which is the L8 ACOP, and you can see it on the top right hand side of your screen. And the technical guidance, HSG 274, which we'll talk in depth about. Many relevant sections to this presentation in there. There's other things as well, HTM 04, which is particularly useful for healthcare premises, and the HSE website is a really good source of information. But there are lots and lots of other bits of guidance which are really practical out there. SIBS to do some good stuff as well. So there's plenty of stuff online for you to have a look at. So a bit more detail about the L8 ACOP. Always makes me smile. We still talk about the new ACOP. It's now 6 years old, but yeah, the 4th edition now. That's supported by the British Standard 8580, which is going through a refresh, which is how basically you comply with the L8 ACOP by performing risk assessments. That's just refreshed, so that's all online as well, available too. So the Code of Special Legal Status is the L8. It's not law, however, but this is a real good take-home message for you today. If you are prosecuted for a breach of health and safety law, and it is proved that you did not follow the relevant provisions of the code, you would need to demonstrate that you've complied with the law in some other way, or a court would find you at fault. So in essence, no, it's not the law, it's guidelines. But I think as it's all there in a practical, handy step-by-step guide, I think it's best that we all kind of comply with it really, and all the requirements that comes with it. So it also gives practical background to COSH and management of health and safety at work 1999. So it's all there for us, and again, it's all free, available online to download. So if you think about the L8 as kind of what you have to do, the sister documentation to L8 is the HSG 274 Part 2, and that tells you how you do it. So it covers in some detail, and I like it. There's lots of text and lots of diagrams as well. It's really quite useful. It's quite user friendly. So if you are looking in a housing association or local authority, it gives you a bit more background into safeguarding residents, visitors, employees. Okay, so we're interested in section 2. Part 1 is cooling towers. Section 2 is hot and cold water systems, and 3 is a kind of a catch-all for other systems such as car washing and water features. But we're interested in part 2. It talks about hot and cold water systems, temperature, use, turnover, and managing aerosol discharge. Okay, so if you haven't already got it, please download it free of charge from the HSE website. Really useful document. So what does that mean to us all? So putting that into context. So many of our clients are housing associations and landlords. So again, it just puts a bit more flesh on the bones, and it explains the duty to assess the risk from exposure to Legionella, and ensures the health and safety of the risk of their tenants. Okay, but the key thing is, again, on the take-home measure is practical and proportionate application of health and safety law. So it's all about reasonable, practical, and proportionate. Okay, so it's about identifying the controls and identifying measures to basically combat the risks that you've identified. So proportionate, okay, be realistic. So what does that mean to us? So it's quite clearly set out in HSG 274 Part 2 with a task list. So we've kind of lifted that from the document for our presentation this morning, which I'm hopefully you should find useful. So on a monthly basis, we should be taking temperatures for Cisterns outlets. Remember, a Cisterns is the nearest and furthest outlet from a water fitting. So it could be a storage system or it could be a calorifier. So nearest and furthest, that gives you a really good temperature profile of the building itself and how the system is performing. You should be doing it on a monthly basis. That gives you a good idea throughout the year, so you can gauge seasonal variation through temperature changes, weather patterns, etc. And we should also be measuring calorifier flow and return temperatures. Okay, quarterly. The main task for a quarterly visit is shower descales and have a look as well to see if they're actually clean and not got any mold or mildew or anything on them. So they need to descale every quarterly. As defined by the risk assessment, if you live in a particular hard water area, you might need them doing more regular than that, or conversely, soft area, you might need them doing a little bit less. So again, it's all down to local variation, but you should be aware of the water hardness of your area. Annually, inspect your cold water storage systems, and that's what we're going to talk about today. The guidelines say do it in the summer months because that gives you an idea of when the system is performing at its worst. Okay, so it's always best to see the best case and a worst case scenario so you can manage accordingly. Annually, should be doing sample analysis of calorifier drain downlines and visual checks where possible and practical. So we do see quite a lot of tenders where you see small cylinders, and we do get questions of how am I going to internally check the cylinder. You can't. You can only do that when you've got actual inspection panels on the side where they're easily accessible. Or you could, if possible, do a drain line check. But I think it's more really applicable to shared systems, communal water systems, as opposed to individual domestic calorifiers. Annually, should be doing a TMV strainer and disinfection and service, and a fail-safe as well. So every TMV should be checked on a minimum annual basis. But again, looking at manufacturer's instructions for those pieces of kit. And every couple of years, we advise you very minimum to review your risk assessment as well, to make sure that any system changes have been picked up in your risk assessment and your control measures are performing as such and everything's in a good place. All right, so that's the task list. So we'll hone in on a little bit on the cold water tanks and what you have to do. So again, this is lifted directly from HSG 274. So on an annual basis, inspect cold water storage tanks and carry out remedial works where necessary. So it gives you a little bit more information on that. It talks about checking the tank water temperature, remote from the ball valve, and incoming mains temperature. So what that means is basically checking your float valve at the mains temperatures coming in and checking the water temperature that's far away from the storage tank as possible. So it just gives you an idea of thermal heat gain within the storage system. It gives you a bit of an idea of turnover as well. Obviously, if there's a big temperature change, it means that you're getting excess heat from the surrounding area, which means it's not being turned over fast enough. You might want to think about further insulation or reducing the storage capacity of it. Record the maximum temperatures and basically note these. There's a bit more of a section there about what you need to be recording later on. So how often do you do these? It used to be twice a year, but now it's down to annual. When does that mean? Between summer months. Again, it's not particularly prescriptive. When is summer? Summers, they seem to be getting later. So we've said between kind of the months of May to September, hence the presentation today, because we should all be thinking about starting off our storage system inspections. So I think now's a really good time to bring it to the top of the list. As just a reminder for us all today, we should have them in place and start them. Bit more information, 2.57, again, this is from HSG. An annual inspection of the cold water storage tank should be done to check its condition inside and outside and the water within it, okay? Key points, check the condition outside and inside and the water within. So we'll show you a few more photographs further on in the presentation, but it talks about the condition of the cold water storage tanks and when action should be taken, okay? The lid should be closely fitting and in good condition. The insect and vermin screen on the overflow and warning pipes and end vent should be intact and in good condition. So our technicians will always have a good look at this, making sure the lid is tight fitting, screw it in where possible, and look at the insect screens, make sure they're in a good position. Any vent pipes that go in from your clarifiers going to the lid, have a good tight fitting grommet on there, so there's no chance of any ingress from any contaminants from the loft space or the surrounding area. Very important. And again, we talked about temperature changes. Thermal insulation should be in good condition so it protects from extremes of temperature. Again, that's more kind of thermal. That's more from a heat than a frost perspective. So it's a good thing to check that on an annual basis as well. When we always take the lid off the storage system, we'll always have a good look to make sure there's no contaminants. You can get a good look from the water. It should be glossy, should be clean looking, shouldn't be any films on there, and it should be turned over, and it should smell nice as well. Okay. And obviously, if there's anything in there that shouldn't be, we'll talk about that later on. But so now's a good time to act. So the installation itself, a little bit more information. This I've lifted from the water regulations guide. The way I see it, the water regulations guide is a fantastic tool for installation of water fittings, and I think HSG for me is more of an ongoing maintenance issue. It's a bit of advice for what you need to do with a task list. So if you could comply with the water regulations guide, which remember in the first couple of slides is the law, you'd be somewhere there. So a nice little photograph there, a nice little diagram of what we're looking for. So you've got your inlet to the left-hand side with an isolation valve. Isolation valve is important. Every water fitting like this, every float valve should have an isolation valve. So if something goes wrong, then you can isolate it. It's a practical thing. You see the float valve there. The inlets and outlets are on opposing sides on this drawing. A little bit unfortunate because you see the outlet is at the bottom. That is ideal. If you can ever find one that's installed like that, let me know. Very rarely. They're usually on the side, but that's perfect. Okay. Again, outlet has got an isolation valve on it, so anything downstream of that flow valve, if it goes wrong, you can isolate it without having to drain the tank. It's a water efficiency fitting, which is really good. The lid on the top, you can see it's nicely secured. This one is slightly unusual because it's got an access cover, which is kind of not integral to the lid. It's like kind of separate. So it's a lid within a lid. Really, really good for access. You can take that off, a bit easier to have a look inside. We have a nice vent pipe there, which is sleeved and grommeted, as I mentioned before. And you've got the air inlet at the top, which is screened. So basically what we're saying is water trickles into that, air's got to go in as well to displace it, or air's got to go out to displace it. And that's got to be meshed to stop ingress from contaminants and insects. You've got this one here, the warning pipe, the overflow. If it's over a certain size, you should have a warning pipe and an overflow, and they should be screened again to prevent access from basically insects and the rest of it. And they should be going to a conspicuous area. So if it does go into a fault condition, you physically could see it leaking and do something about it. Okay. Key thing about inlets and outlets being an opposing side is that the peculiarity of water is it's particularly dense the colder it gets until it reaches freezing point. So if you see the inlet on the left-hand side there, it potentially could be from the mains. Well, it should be from the mains. It's going to come up cold. You've got a storage tank that's in a loft, which could be slightly elevated in temperature. The cold water from the mains, because it's denser than the storage tank, would sink straight to the bottom, which isn't a problem, providing the outlet's on the opposite side. What you would get if that inlet was on next to the outlet was next to the inlet is you get a short circuiting where the dense water sinks to the bottom and goes straight to the outlet and is not turned over. Then you do get problems. We've seen quite a lot of storage tanks with sediment towards the far end, and it's just never turned over. So it's something to be mindful of. If you ever do see that, you can reconfigure, or you can put a sparge pipe on the outlet pipe work to draw it away from the inlet pipe, just to give it an increased turnover. You find that should help quite a lot with your water quality. Okay. So we're now on to, that was kind of basically a bit more information on the outside of the tank. This is puts it into context with regards to the loft space. So we do see quite a lot of storage systems when we're doing our risk assessments on our annual inspections that are very, very close to the loft, to the actual roof itself. So the guide or the regulations say that there should be a minimum of 350 mils. Now, bear in mind that you've got to, if you have to do work on these storage systems, you'd have to take the lid off, and you'd have to physically work on it, potentially disinfect, scrub, mechanically scrub, drain, and clean. If you've got no space above the storage tank, you're going to make it really, really hard for yourself to do any work on there. So the minimum there is 350 mils, nearest the kind of eaves of the loft. We'd recommend more than that, but it's something to be mindful when you're looking at it. You're looking at storage systems, and if you're doing any design work, please factor that in. And you can also see the photograph on the right-hand side. It's on a really good solid base. Marine ply is always good. And again, that one gives you a little bit of access underneath it, so you can work on the water fittings and the outlets underneath. But yeah, it's always very important to make sure that base is larger than the storage tank itself. You'd be surprised how many storage tanks we see where the actual storage tank is physically larger than the base it's on, and it's kind of bowing out. Very, very dangerous. So just keep your eye on that whenever you do these inspections or see any storage tanks. Make sure these tanks are adequately supported. You can imagine how heavy they are. Very, very heavy. Okay. So that's on the outside. Cistern condition. We'll have a look now on the inside of the storage system. So on the left-hand side, again, this is taken from HSG 274 Part 2. The left-hand side is what we call the good. So I'm quite happy with that. If I opened up a lid and looked into that, it'd be pretty good. It does mention at the bottom there's very slight corrosion on the bolt, so that would be an idea to keep your eye on. But at the bottom of that storage tank, there's very little sediment. These sort of storage systems and how dirty are they is very subjective. As a team, we do regularly get the technicians in to have a look at photographs and rate them. So we're all singing from the proverbial song sheet. What we have found when we talk to clients and technicians alike is that when you look at the bottom of the storage system, if there is a lighter storage system bottom, which this one is a light blue, it highlights the sediment. There's a big contrast, and everybody seems to kind of say there's an awful lot of sediment when potentially there isn't. Okay, so bear that in mind, that the contrast between the storage system and the colour of the sediment, it can kind of exaggerate the levels of sediment. The one on the right hand side, yes, that's bad. I've seen worse. It's moderate fouling. That is sediment basically from the mains inlet. It could have been that the fact that the water company have been doing some work in the street and drawn a little bit of sediment in through the float valve. That's usually what happens. Remember, bacteria need a food source. The sediment at the bottom of that storage tank is acting as a food source, and it needs getting rid of basically. So that would be, we'd recommend a clean on that. So that would be drawing off that's the sediment from the bottom and giving it a mechanical scrub and a disinfection. That's for the next 12 months. It's not a high risk, but it's something to keep your eye on. Okay. And the next one, you'll brace yourself, is the ugly, particularly bad storage system. Do you remember the early slides I talked about taking the lid off and having a smell of the water? If you took the lid off in the storage tank and saw that, you'd be bitterly disappointed. You can see the biofilm on the top, there's sediment on there. You can see underneath at the to the base of the tank, the tank itself is physically corroded. I imagine, photograph's not clear, it could be a galvanized storage tank, so you've got corrosion there. All this is basically nutrients and food for bacteria, which they are clearly lapping it up. And it's evidently not turned over much as well, so there's excess capacity there as well. So you've got all the conditions there are perfect for bacterial growth. So that really is something that's, if you ever saw something like that, you'd need to act on it pretty quickly. So that would be a disinfection and a descale. Potentially a storage system renewal, I think, would be the best attempt to deal with that. It's particularly bad. Right, so we'll go on to the next slide. We do get quite a lot of questions about sampling. To sample, so we put a special section there to sample or not sample. So when we do survey work and we do risk assessments and we kind of talk to our clients, a lot of them are very proud and you talk to them how you've Legionella control measures in place, and the first thing we get past a lot of the times is, yeah, please have a look at my sample results folder. You've got to remember really that that's not a control measure. Sampling is never a control measure. You could have the worst system in the world. If you're going to take a lot of samples, you're not going to rid the system of Legionella bacteria. Sampling is only a validation method and not a control method, okay? So basically, it will tell you if you've got bacteria there or not. It won't actually get rid of them. So to answer the question, when to sample. So first things first, look at your risk assessment. If it recommends a sampling regime in there, pay that some attention. It could be the case that you've got susceptible individuals under that storage cistern, then in which case we'd recommend a sampling regime. Again, look at the risk assessment for a bit of guidance on there. It could be the fact that you do a sample every 6 months, kind of from different outlets from the storage system itself for Legionella bacteria. That can be useful and indicative of how the system is physically performing. When the technicians see stagnant water, as the previous slide showed, that might be a chance to take samples because it's clearly stagnant. And to be fair, that last one before, I would just assume it's got Legionella in it. But if you're not too sure and you suspect stagnant water, then I would take a temperature from it, sorry, a sample from it, especially if you've got elevated temperatures. So if you've got a storage tank that's been sat in a loft that's really not performing well, so you've got a temperature there between 25 and 45, that is in a danger zone for bacterial growth. So I would recommend that a sample is taken immediately. Also, if you have a suspected outbreak or an illness, it could be a water hygiene issue, i.e. somebody could have a diarrhea incident or something like that, then they suspect it could be water hygiene, then in which case take a Legionella sample, but also take other samples as well. TVC might be an idea under this situation, and also more probably we better take coliforms and E. coli as just evidence of fecal contamination. That would be particularly useful. Or also we've taken samples before when cisterns or water systems on the whole are treated with a chemical such as chlorine dioxide, and the chlorine dioxide levels are particularly low. So in which case, if your chemical regime is not performing as it should, it's quite often a good idea to take a sample. Okay. So I think we've gone over that. There are occasions when you do need to sample, but the point I'm trying to get across is do not consider routine. You have to routinely sample for Legionella bacteria. You don't. Okay. These are the guidelines that are there for us all to see and act accordingly. Remember, when we take a sample, if you do a plate culture sample analysis in a laboratory, you will get the results 2 weeks later. A lot happens in 2 weeks, so it could be the case that for peace of mind, you ask for a rapid test. This is what we started doing some time ago now. So you can get a result back within an hour. However, it's quite a bit more expensive. You're looking about for £120 for a test, and it will only give you a positive for Legionella pneumophila species 1. Okay, so they're the ones that are implicated in Legionnaires disease. However, there are serogroup 2 to 14 which it will not pick up, and they are implicated in lesser illnesses such as Pontiac fever. So it's something to be mindful of. The technology is not quite there yet. I am aware that they are working hard on it to get species 1 and 2 to 14 up and running, but it's not. We're not quite there yet. Okay, but they are quite useful. Something that we offer. So when you've been to your storage system and you've had a look, you take the lid off and you've had a look at it, the key thing is to write your recordings down. Whenever you have an audit, internal or external, the first thing we'll do is kind of see your records. So there's a statement there that we live by. If you've not written your name against it or signed it, you've not done it. Very, very key when it comes to anything to do with control measures and health and safety. I'm sure you're all aware of it, but it's a good reminder. Make sure that you write your name against it. It's very, very important to do. Okay. So yes, list all your findings. So everything that's good, everything that's bad should be documented. So an example of what we do here is this is just an Excel report that we export for our clients. So basically, it gives you a list of all the things that we've seen and we're not happy with, and then it gives you a RAG status, red, amber, and green. We give you associated timeframes to get the work completed, and we find that quite useful. And everybody knows where we are with regards to storage systems. So that's something to be mindful of. Something we're quite happy with. Right, on now to a case example. This was one that we worked on recently. recently. This was just before Christmas time at the NHS. It was quite an interesting one. So we had a healthcare property and routine sampling, because they had susceptible individuals on the end of the storage sample. Storage cistern had very high Legionella counts. So on internal inspection of the storage cistern, this wasn't done at the summer period, it was done at the kind of Christmas time. We flipped off the lid and we found that the storage cistern itself had turnover issues, and it needed a good clean and disinfection, and there was basically far too much water stored in there. So you can imagine that the client needed a bit of reassurance, so we formulated a plan. So the short-term plan was to scrub and disinfect the storage cistern internally and disinfect all the associated pipe runs. Remember that it's absolutely fine to disinfect the storage cistern, but if you've got pipe work that's still got bacteria living on the pipe walls downstream of that, then your disinfection is not particularly effective. So you need to disinfect all your storage systems and affected storage systems and associated pipe work and all outlets as well. The issue with this particular site was that on the end of the storage system, you had susceptible individuals, but you had also a means of aerosol. You had a lot of people with showers on the end of this pipe work. You're all aware that showers are the high risk outlets. So what we're to do? So we decided to fit filter shower heads to this storage system. So we ordered those in prompt, and basically you're reducing the risk from aerosols by containing the bacteria within the pipework until we could ascertain that everything had been killed off and it were all back to results were as they should be. The long-term facts or long-term plan was to rationalise the stored water to improve the turnover and reduce any dead legs or remove them completely, what we saw on site. A bit more information on that now. So you can see that any storage system inspections or disinfections that we do, we take photographs as documented evidence. So you can see on the left-hand side of the storage system, remember it's white as before, the contrast with the sediment. So you can see the sediment, you can see it it's quite apparent there. Other than that, the storage system didn't look too bad. However, we were aware that when you took the lid off, you could tell the water didn't smell fresh, it didn't smell particularly chlorinated, so there was a lot of overcapacity from that storage system. So we can see we disinfected it, and the photographs on the right-hand side show the after, the post, so before and after. I think you can see we did a pretty good job on that. The sediment is all gone, and the water line was all cleared of scale and disinfected accordingly. We left it in a good job. So yeah, I was happy with that. So again, after work, we always submit a sheet of the declaration of the work that we've done and further advice. So that's all fitted in the logbook, your water hygiene logbook. So when you look at it in the future, you can see exactly what's been done and what needs to be done. So it gives a description at the bottom of the actions that we did. We resampled, did a full pipe wet survey, and did a disinfection. Okay, and there's some more statements at the top about the things that we see and what we've done. Leaking pipe work and temperature fluctuations all on there. So good bit of work. So that's my first part done. So it's over to Andrew if he's got any questions from the viewers. I'm ready and waiting for you.
Hello. Yes, Mike, we've got a couple of questions here. The first one is, does this webinar form a part of a series of water hygiene webinars?
Yes, we plan to do a few more. Yes, that's very much, yes, that's a positive. Yes, we will do those, yes. Excellent.
What we'll do is you can now register for the webinars through our website. After this, what we'll do is we'll send an email out to everybody just with a direction there. So keep an eye out on it, but we will let you know via sort of the usual channels, email, and if you follow any of our social media channels as well, we'll be putting them up there as well.
Yep.
The next question is.
Sorry, Andrew. We're also putting some instructional videos online as well, which we've done the first one on storage systems, so you'll be able to see that shortly as well online.
That's right. Yeah. Next question is, why check every year? If 1 year, why can't we just leave it as it is?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good question. Basically, the HSC, the HSG 274 guidelines suggest that you have to do it on an annual basis. So as far as I'm concerned, if it suggests you do it, then it's a recommendation. I would do it. However, there are practical reasons. Buildings tend to be larger buildings, well, all buildings to be honest, but tend to be dynamic in their use. So you do, if you say you've got a care home, residents come, residents go. So water usage will change over the year. So it's always a good time to see if that storage system's got the right size, Also, it's a good idea that to have a look, to flip the lid and see how it's like physically performing. We've had issues in the past where somebody's been in and not put the lid back on correctly. We've had sources of contamination, so it's always a good chance to look on a minimum of an annual basis just to check how it's going on and act accordingly. So yeah, recommend them always at least minimum of.
Okay. Next question, and I believe you're going to show us some photos after this question session on some of the issues that can kind of go wrong if you're not keeping an eye on this sort of thing. But it's what do we do if we find a dead bird in it?
Yes, yeah, unfortunately we do get a few dead birds and the rest of it, not very nice. So I think the first thing to do when we see something like that is once you see that, is just to reassure the end user that you've got it in hand, so that could potentially be the clients. So first things first is to find out what the storage system is feeding. If that's feeding at what I call wholesome use, so people are washing their teeth in it or drinking it, even worse, then those outlets need to be not consumed from with an immediate effect, because that's a health risk immediately. So that needs to be done appropriately. We've done that in the past by labelling up taps: do not drink from, do not wash, do not use. So we've done that in the past. It's okay for commercial industrial use or flushing toilets, but certainly not for wholesome use. So firstly isolate it, and then obviously the bending animal needs to be removed, a mechanical scrub from the storage tank, drain down, a disinfection of all associated pipe work as per the risk assessment, and then fill up and resample. And I think when it comes to dead animals and things like that, it's not a Legionella risk per se, it's more of a water hygiene, more of a coliforms and E. coli. So I'll take a Legionella sample. I would also take a TVC and a coliform and E. coli from that sort of storage system. And once you've got clear results, coliforms and E. coli, you should get the results back within 48 hours. Once that's up and running, then you're good to go. And I would also question how the bird's got in. Is the lid tightly fixed on? So if it's not, make sure remedial works are done to make sure it's not going to happen again. Okay.
Okay. The final question is, what do we do if we've got an overflow running? Do we need to sort of act on it immediately?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, we are Legionella biased, we are water hygiene biased, but the thing is nowadays it's always really, really good and important to act on water wastage. So if you do see something like that, then yeah, get it turned off. You might just need a mild adjustment to the flow valve, or you might just need to get a plumber in. But yeah, it does need addressing, and I just check as well where that water is going, making sure it's not causing a hazard anywhere. We've had issues in the winter where that's causing a slip hazard outside because it's refreezing. It's freezing outside, so it's to be mindful of where that water is going. But yes, certainly needs acting on from a water wastage point of view.
Brilliant. Okay. Right. Well, that's the last of our questions that we've got on there, Michael. So I'll hand it back over to you, and I believe you've got some photos for everybody to have a look at. So I will disappear and come back at the end like a magician.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you. So yeah, so just got a few photographs in there. I always like this one. This is a small storage system we saw in a domestic loft. There was light getting in there, so you can see what happens when you don't have a lid on. You get light, basically, and it's not turned over. You're going to get growth. So what if after you get the biofilms starts thickening up, you start getting moss forming. You can see on the right hand side some sort of plant is growing. So imagine if you came back in 20 years, you start getting a sapling and an oak tree in there. Eventually, you will get natural vegetative succession going on your storage tanks if you don't look after them. So again, that's just a matter of, I think that's beyond repair. I would suggest these sort of things. It's not cost effective to start cleaning them. I just throw away and start again, and put one with a tight fitting lid on there. And again, it's only small, but I would monitor what that is physically feeding. If we've had issues in the past where storage systems do remain, but yet the building downstairs has all been mains converted. So a little bit of investigative work wouldn't go amiss to find out exactly what that's doing. There's a vent pipe in there. Is that active? Is it live? So I would be a bit more research on there, but yeah, it's not ideal. Yeah, we've wheeled this photograph out quite a few times, but it's this squirrel taking a backstroke. It's what unfortunately we do see. That, believe it or not, was a relatively quick clean. The tank itself wasn't in bad condition. It just needed a mechanical scrub and a chemical disinfection and then a resample, and it was up and running within well, basically 3 days once we got the clear sample results through. But yeah, that was obviously a health and hygiene risk to all users, not necessarily just Legionella. it's a real problem. People brushing their teeth in that sort of water is really not good. Yeah, turnover issues on that one, brilliant. No lid on that. That was on a roof space. You can see that's just completely exposed to the environment. You've got all sorts of horrible nasties going on there. You've got lots of greenery going on, loving the water. It's more of a pond than a storage cistern. I think you wouldn't take a sample with that. You'd take a sample net. Really, really bad. So again, expensive bit of kit, physical, mechanical clean to see what it's like behind all the green. Get a lid on it. Sample and see if it's really needed at all. It might be the case that you don't need it anymore at all, or replace it with a smaller one just to make sure the water's turned over in once every 24 hours. So yeah, that's far from ideal. And again, same with that one. Remember that one? That was the light was coming through from the loft, no lid on it. That was for dry cleaners. Really, really bad. It hadn't been used for many times. Just a matter of removing completely. Really, really bad. So. Yep, there you go. That's me. Thank you very much for viewing today. Over to you, Andrew.
Hello, everybody. Yes, thanks very much, Michael, for that. Just a kind of a wrap up for everybody. So we've recorded this live, so this will go on our website, so you'll be able to review it at your leisure if there's anything that you want to go back over. After this also, there will be a short survey that pops up. We'd really like your feedback on that. This is going to help us sort of form where we go with these. So if you've got a particular burning question that you would like a bit more detailed knowledge on, please do let us know. And what we'll do is we'll form a webinar around that. That survey, if you don't have time straight away after this, will get emailed out to you as well. So if you've got to rush off to another meeting, then feel free to fill it in later. Other than that, thank you very much for joining us for our first webinar. And we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
Thank you.